The shot rang out just as Eleanor Catherine's hand closed around the deed to her father's ranch, and she knew before the sheriff even spoke that everything she had fought for was about to get a whole lot harder. Her father had been dead 3 months, buried on the hillside overlooking the valley he had carved from wilderness with his own 2 hands. Now here she stood in the cramped office of Leadville's only lawyer, clutching the paper that made her sole owner of 2,000 acres of Colorado mountain country, while half the men in town gathered outside to protest. The year was 1878, and women were not supposed to inherit property, let alone run it. But Thomas Catherine had been stubborn as a mule, and his daughter had inherited more than just his land. "Miss Catherine, I must advise you to reconsider selling," the lawyer said, mopping his brow with a handkerchief that had seen better days. "The mining company has made a generous offer, and managing a ranch of that size it requires a man's hand." Eleanor folded the deed carefully and tucked it into the leather satchel at her side. She was 23 years old, with her mother's dark copper hair and her father's steel-gray eyes that could stop a charging bull at 20 paces. "Mr. Henderson, my father built that ranch from nothing. He survived winter storms that killed half his herd, fought off claim jumpers, and broke his back building every fence post on that property. And you know who was beside him for the last 15 years of that? Me. Not a son, not a hired hand he had to pay. Me." "Yes, but surely you understand the delicate nature of your position. An unmarried woman, alone on a remote property. It simply isn't done." The second shot came then, followed by shouting. Eleanor moved to the window and saw a crowd had gathered in the street below. Most were miners, men who had flocked to Leadville when silver was discovered in the surrounding mountains. They were drunk on cheap whiskey, and the rumor that the Catherine Ranch sat on a vein of silver ore that could make them all rich. "They would not be so bold if your father still lived," Henderson said quietly. "No, they would not." Eleanor turned from the window, her jaw set in a line Henderson recognized. He had seen that same expression on Thomas Catherine's face 100 times. "Which is precisely why I need to get back to the ranch before they decide to visit in person. At least hire some men to protect the property. I could recommend several who are capable and trustworthy. With what money, Mr. Henderson? The ranch barely turns a profit as it is. Every penny goes back into feed and repairs. Besides, any man I hire will either try to take over or expect me to marry him for his trouble. I have seen it happen to other women." Henderson sighed, knowing he was defeated before he even tried. "You are too stubborn for your own good, girl. That is what people say about you, you know. Too stubborn for any man to handle." Eleanor smiled then, a quick flash of humor in her gray eyes. "Then I suppose it is fortunate I have no interest in being handled." She left the lawyer's office by the back stairs, avoiding the crowd still gathered in front. Her horse, a sturdy bay mare named Copper, waited in the alley where she had tied her. Eleanor mounted smoothly, years of practice making the motion second nature even in her riding skirt. The ranch was a hard 3-hour ride into the mountains, following a trail that wound through stands of aspen and pine. She needed to be home before dark. The ride gave her time to think, which was both a blessing and a curse. Her father's death had not been unexpected. His heart had been failing for years, each winter taking a little more out of him until that final morning when he simply had not woken up. But knowing death was coming did not make it easier to bear, and the loneliness of the ranch without his steady presence was like a physical ache in her chest. The trail climbed steadily, leaving the bustle of Leadville behind. Up here, the air was thinner and cleaner, scented with pine and the cold bite of snow that never quite left the highest peaks. Eleanor had been born in these mountains, in the rough cabin her father had built with his own hands. Her mother had died when she was 7, caught in a late spring blizzard while riding back from town. After that, it had been just Eleanor and her father, and he had raised her the only way he knew how, teaching her to ride, to shoot, to read the weather and the land. She was so lost in thought that she almost missed the tracks crossing the trail. Almost, but not quite. Eleanor pulled Copper to a halt and dismounted, crouching to examine the marks in the soft earth. 3 horses, unshod, moving fast and recently. The tracks headed in the direction of her ranch. Her heart began to pound. Unshod horses meant either wild mustangs, which stayed clear of established trails, or riders who did not want to be identified. Given the crowd in Leadville and the timing, she had a bad feeling about which it was. Eleanor remounted and urged Copper into a gallop, heedless of the rough terrain. The mare responded gamely, her hooves finding purchase on the rocky trail. They covered the remaining miles in record time, and as they crested the final ridge, Eleanor's worst fears were confirmed. Smoke rose from the direction of her ranch house, a thin gray column against the brilliant blue sky. She drove Copper harder, and the mare gave everything she had, plunging down the slope with the reckless speed of a landslide. The ranch came into view, and Eleanor saw that it was not the house burning but one of the outbuildings, the old hay barn her father had built the first year. 3 men on horseback circled the yard, whooping and hollering. As she watched, one threw a torch onto the roof of the chicken coop. Rage, white-hot and blinding, surged through Eleanor. She pulled the rifle from its scabbard on her saddle, a Winchester her father had given her on her 16th birthday. She had never shot a man, but she had faced down mountain lions and bears, and these men were no different. Predators looking for easy prey. "Get off my land!" Her voice cracked like a whip across the yard. The 3 men wheeled their horses to face her. They were rough-looking, the kind of drifters who followed mining booms from camp to camp. One, a heavy-set man with a patchy beard, laughed. "Your land. This here is about to be property of the Consolidated Mining Company, little lady. We are just helping things along. This land belongs to me, legal and proper. I have the deed right here. Now get out before I put a bullet in each of you." The second man, lean as a whip with cold blue eyes, spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "You ain't going to shoot nobody. Women don't have the stomach for it." Eleanor raised the rifle to her shoulder, sighted down the barrel, and fired. The bullet kicked up dirt between the lean man's horse's front hooves, and the animal reared, nearly throwing its rider. When the man got his mount under control, his face was pale. "Next one goes through flesh," Eleanor said calmly, working the lever to chamber another round. "I do not much care whether it is yours or the horse's, your choice. You crazy, I count to 3, 1. The heavy-set man held up his hands. "Easy now, we was just having some fun, no harm done. My barn is on fire. My chickens are scattered to the hills. That seems like harm to me. 2. The third man, who had been silent until now, was younger than the others, barely old enough to shave. He looked genuinely frightened. "Come on, we should go. She means it." 3, they went, spurring their horses into a gallop that sent them thundering down the valley trail toward Leadville. Eleanor kept the rifle trained on them until they disappeared from sight. Then she lowered it and let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. The barn was already gone, the dry timber burning too hot and fast to save. But the chicken coop fire had not quite caught, and Eleanor managed to beat out the flames with a saddle blanket, leaving only a scorched patch on the roof. The chickens, predictably, were everywhere except their coop, and it took her the better part of an hour to round them up. By the time she finished, the sun was setting behind the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. Eleanor stood in the yard of her ranch, surrounded by the evidence of her father's life's work, and felt the weight of it all settle onto her shoulders. The house, the corrals, the pastures where cattle grazed, the high meadows where they would drive the herd come summer. All of it hers now to protect and preserve or lose. She was feeding the stock when she heard the horse approaching. Eleanor grabbed her rifle and positioned herself in the barn doorway, ready to make good on her earlier threat if the men had returned. But the rider who emerged from the gathering dusk was not one of the three from earlier. He was bigger, for one thing. Much bigger. The man sat astride a massive roan gelding that looked like it could pull a freight wagon without breaking a sweat, and the rider was proportioned to match. Even mounted, Eleanor could tell he was tall, with shoulders broad enough to fill a doorway and arms that strained the seams of his buckskin shirt. His hair was dark and worn long, tied back with a leather cord, and a thick beard covered the lower half of his face. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, pale blue and sharp as broken glass, taking in every detail of the ranch yard with a single sweeping glance. "Private property," Eleanor called out, keeping the rifle ready but not quite pointed at him. Something about this man was different from the others. He held himself with a quiet confidence that spoke of competence, not bluster. The man reined his horse to a stop a respectful distance away and raised one hand in a peaceable gesture. "I can see that. I am looking for the Catherine ranch." "Seems I found it. What business do you have here?" "Name is Xander Pierce. I have a letter for Miss Eleanor Catherine from her father." Eleanor's heart skipped. "My father is dead. I know. He gave me the letter before he died, made me promise to deliver it if anything happened to him. Took me a while to make my way down from the high country." She studied him carefully. Her father had known many men, trappers and mountain men who worked the high peaks, living for months at a time in the wilderness. Thomas Catherine had been one himself before he settled down to ranching. If this Xander Pierce was one of them, it might explain the letter. "Come forward slowly," Eleanor said. "Keep your hands where I can see them." Xander Pierce did as instructed, walking his horse closer. In the fading light, Eleanor could see more details. He was maybe 30 years old, give or take, with the weathered skin of a man who spent most of his time outdoors. A long scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, pale against his tanned face. He wore 2 knives on his belt and had a rifle in a scabbard, but he made no move toward any weapon. He reached into his shirt and pulled out a folded piece of paper, sealed with wax. Eleanor recognized her father's seal immediately, the TC pressed into red wax. Her throat tightened. "Toss it to me," she said. Xander complied, his throw gentle and accurate. Eleanor caught the letter one-handed and broke the seal, unfolding the paper. Her father's handwriting, shaky in his last months but still recognizable, covered the page. "Ellie," it began, using the nickname no one else was allowed to call her. "If you are reading this, then I am gone and you are alone. I know you are strong enough to handle the ranch. You are twice the rancher any son could have been. But I also know that there are men who will not see it that way, who will try to take what is yours by force or trickery. Xander Pierce is a good man, one of the best I have ever known. He has worked the mountains for 15 years and knows this country better than any living soul. If you need help, you can trust him. He owes me nothing, but I am hoping he might be willing to stay on for a spell if you ask. He is stubborn as you are, so you will either get along fine or kill each other. Either way, know that I love you and I am proud of the woman you have become. Your father, Thomas Catherine." Eleanor read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and tucked it into her pocket. When she looked up at Xander Pierce, he was watching her with those pale eyes, his expression unreadable. "What did my father do for you?" she asked. "Saved my life, back in '67. I was trapping beaver up on the North Fork when a grizzly caught me by surprise. Tore me up pretty good before I managed to put a ball in her. I made it about half a mile before I collapsed. Your father found me, brought me down to his ranch, and he and your mother nursed me back to health. Took 3 months before I could walk right again." Eleanor remembered that year. She had been 12 and her mother had still been alive. She had vague memories of a big man recuperating in the back room, but her mother had kept her away, saying he needed rest. "That was 11 years ago," Eleanor said. "You do not owe him anything anymore. A life debt does not have an expiration, Miss Catherine. I told your father I would come if he ever needed help. He never called in that marker while he was alive, but it seems he is calling it in now. I do not need charity. Did not figure you did. Your father said you were as independent as a hog on ice. But I am guessing from the burned-out barn and the tracks all over your yard that you have had some trouble today." Eleanor's jaw tightened. "Nothing I could not handle." "I am sure you handled it just fine. But trouble like that tends to come back, usually with more friends. And judging by what I heard in Leadville before I rode up here, you have got half the town thinking they can push you off this land and claim it for themselves. Let them try." Xander was quiet for a moment, then he did something unexpected. He smiled, a quick flash of white teeth in his dark beard. "Your father said you would say something like that. He also said you were too stubborn for any man to handle, and that was exactly why you would make it out here when others failed. And what do you think? I think stubbornness is just another word for determination when it is pointed in the right direction. And I think you are going to need help whether you want to admit it or not." He paused, then added, "I am offering to stay on for a month, maybe 2, just until things settle down. I will help with the ranch work, make sure nobody bothers you. In return, you give me room and board. No pay necessary. After that, if you want me to go, I go. No hard feelings." Eleanor wanted to refuse. Every instinct she had told her that accepting help was the first step toward losing control, toward becoming dependent on someone who would inevitably expect something in return. But she was also practical enough to know that Xander Pierce was right. The men who had burned her barn would come back, and next time they might bring more friends. And there was work to be done, work that her father had handled, and that she would now have to manage alone. An extra pair of hands, especially hands that belonged to someone who knew the mountains and the work, would make the difference between surviving and failing. 1 month, she said finally. You can use the bunk room in the barn. Well, you could have, but it burned down. I suppose you will have to take the back room in the house. The barn is fine. I will sleep there anyway. Just throw me a couple of blankets. It is just burned down timbers and ashes. Xander shrugged those massive shoulders. I have slept in worse places. But if it makes you feel better, I will rig up a shelter with what is left. I am good at making do. Eleanor nodded slowly. There are beans and bacon in the house. Come up when you are ready to eat. She turned and walked toward the house before he could respond, her back straight and her head high. She did not look back, but she could feel his eyes on her, assessing and thoughtful. It made her skin prickle with awareness, though she could not have said why. The house was dark and cold when she entered. Eleanor lit the lamps and stoked the fire in the stove, then set about making dinner. Her hands moved automatically through the familiar tasks, but her mind was elsewhere. She kept thinking about her father's letter, about the fact that he had known he was dying and had made plans for her protection. It was so like him to think of everything, to try to take care of her even from beyond the grave. But it also stung a little, the implication that she could not handle things on her own. She had been running this ranch alongside her father for years. She knew every head of cattle, every fence line, every water source. She could birth a calf, break a horse, and shoot straight enough to drop a deer at 100 yards. What did she need with a mountain man who probably had not slept in a real bed in years? She was still mulling it over when Xander knocked on the door frame. He had unsaddled his horse and settled the animal in the corral, and he stood in the doorway with his hat in his hands, looking almost comically large in the frame of the modest ranch house. "Come in," Eleanor said, ladling beans onto 2 plates. "Food is ready." Xander entered, ducking his head to clear the lintel. He moved carefully, like a man aware of his size and trying not to break anything. When he sat at the table, the chair creaked alarmingly under his weight, but it held. They ate in silence for a few minutes. Eleanor watched him from the corner of her eye, noting the way he ate with economical efficiency, not rushed but not wasting time either. His hands were huge, scarred, and calloused, the hands of a man who worked hard and lived harder. "Your father told me about you," Xander said suddenly. "Last time I saw him, about 6 months back. I was passing through and he invited me to stay for dinner. He talked about you the whole time, how you could outride and outshoot any man in the territory. How you had a head for numbers that made the ranch profitable when it should have been struggling. How you were the best thing that ever happened to him." Eleanor's throat tightened. "He said that? Every word. He was proud of you, Miss Catherine. Prouder than I have ever heard a man talk about his child. He knew you could handle this place on your own. But he also knew that the world is not always fair to women, especially women who refuse to play by the rules society sets for them. He wanted to make sure you had options. That is all. I do not need protecting. Maybe not. But sometimes having someone watch your back means you can focus on what you do best instead of constantly looking over your shoulder." Eleanor considered that. It made a certain kind of sense, irritating as it was to admit. "What about you? Why are you really here? A life debt from 11 years ago seems like a thin reason to spend a month or more working a ranch for no pay." Xander was quiet for a moment, his pale eyes distant. "I have spent the better part of 15 years in the high country, Miss Catherine. Trapping, hunting, living off the land. It is a good life in many ways, quiet, simple. But it is also lonely. And lately I have been thinking that maybe it is time for something different. Your father offered me a job once, years back, but I was not ready to settle down. Now I am not so sure. Thought I would give ranch life a try, see if it suits me. If it does not, I go back to the mountains. No harm done. And if it does suit you," he met her eyes then, and there was something in his gaze that made her pulse quicken. "Then maybe I stay, if I am wanted." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken meanings. Eleanor broke eye contact first, standing to clear the plates. "We start early here. Cattle need feeding by dawn, and there are fences that need mending in the east pasture. I hope you are as good a worker as my father seemed to think." "I will pull my weight, Miss Catherine. You have my word on that." "Eleanor," she said, not quite sure why she was offering. "If you are going to be working here, you might as well call me Eleanor." "Eleanor," he repeated, and the way he said her name in that deep, rumbling voice did strange things to her insides. "Then you should call me Xander. Fair is fair." She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and turned to the wash basin. Behind her, she heard Xander stand and move toward the door. "Thank you for the meal," he said. "I will see you at dawn." Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Eleanor stood at the wash basin, her hands in the cooling water, and wondered what exactly she had just agreed to. The next morning dawned clear and cold, frost sparkling on the grass like scattered diamonds. Eleanor was up before the sun, as was her habit, and she found Xander already at work in the corral. He had somehow salvaged enough timber from the burned barn to construct a rough lean-to shelter against the remaining stone foundation wall. His bedroll was stowed neatly inside, and he was currently forking hay to the horses. "You did not have to start without me," Eleanor said, approaching with 2 mugs of coffee. She offered one to Xander, who accepted it with a nod of thanks. Force of habit. In the mountains, you do not waste daylight. They drank their coffee standing side by side, watching the sun paint the eastern peaks in shades of rose and gold. It was a companionable silence, and Eleanor found herself relaxing slightly. Maybe this would not be as difficult as she had feared. "I need to ride out to the east pasture today," she said. "Check on the cattle and fix the fence line. Winter runoff weakened some of the posts. I will ride with you. 4 hands are better than 2. They saddled their horses and loaded a pack mule with tools and supplies. The ride out to the east pasture took them through some of the most beautiful country Eleanor knew, following a creek lined with aspen and cottonwood. Xander rode easily, clearly at home in the saddle despite his size. He seemed to notice everything, his eyes constantly scanning the landscape. "You are looking for something," Eleanor observed, always. Habit from the mountains. You learn to pay attention to everything, every track, every broken branch, every bird call. It keeps you alive. "And what are you seeing now? Your cattle are healthy. Good weight for early spring. You have been taking care of them." Eleanor felt an absurd flush of pleasure at the compliment. "My father taught me well." They reached the fence line and set to work. Eleanor had expected Xander to take over, to assume he knew better how to do the job, but instead he asked her how she wanted it done, and then followed her lead. He worked with the easy competence of a man who had built 1,000 fences, his powerful arms driving posts into the rocky soil with seemingly effortless strength. Eleanor found herself watching him more than she should. There was something mesmerizing about the way he moved, the flex and bunch of muscles under his shirt, the absolute certainty of each motion. He had removed his hat, and his dark hair gleamed in the sunlight where it had escaped its leather tie. Sweat dampened his shirt, and Eleanor forced herself to look away, focusing on the wire she was stringing. They worked through the morning, stopping only briefly to eat the lunch Eleanor had packed. By early afternoon, they had repaired a good 1/4 mile of fence, and Eleanor was grudgingly impressed with how much they had accomplished. "You work hard," she said as they loaded the tools back onto the mule. "So do you. Most women I have known would not last an hour at this kind of labor. Most women you have known probably did not grow up on a mountain ranch." Xander smiled at that, and Eleanor realized it was the first real smile she had seen from him. It transformed his face, softening the hard edges and making him look younger. "True enough. You are not like any woman I have known, Eleanor Catherine. I will take that as a compliment." It was meant as one. They rode back to the ranch as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks. Eleanor found herself telling Xander about the ranch, about her father's vision for it, about the struggles and triumphs of the past years. He listened more than he talked, asking occasional questions that showed he was genuinely interested. When they reached the ranch yard, they found a visitor waiting. A man in a suit sat astride a fine bay horse, looking profoundly out of place against the rough backdrop of the ranch. Eleanor recognized him immediately. James Morrison, representative of the Consolidated Mining Company. "Miss Catherine," Morrison said, tipping his hat. His eyes slid to Xander and narrowed slightly. "I was hoping we might have a conversation about your property." "There is nothing to discuss, Mr. Morrison. I have already told your representatives that the ranch is not for sale." "Yes. Well, after the unfortunate incident yesterday, I wanted to assure you that those men were not acting on behalf of the company. We do not condone such lawless behavior. And yet they somehow knew that your company wanted my land. Funny how that information got out." Morrison had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Regardless, I am here to make you a new offer. $50,000 for the property, cash money. That is more than generous, Miss Catherine. You could live very comfortably on that sum." $50,000 would not buy me another ranch like this one. My father spent 20 years building this place. It is not for sale at any price. Miss Catherine, please be reasonable. A woman alone cannot possibly manage a property of this size. It would be much better for everyone if you simply accepted the inevitable. Xander had been silent through the exchange, but now he moved his horse closer to Eleanor's, a subtle shift that put him between her and Morrison. "The lady said the ranch is not for sale. Seems pretty clear to me." Morrison's eyes flicked to Xander again, and Eleanor could see him reassessing the situation. "And you are Xander Pierce. I work here." "I see. Well, Miss Catherine, I hope you will reconsider. The offer stands for now, but the company will not wait forever. There are other ways to acquire land." "Is that a threat, Mr. Morrison?" "Not at all. Merely a statement of fact. The mining industry is the future of Colorado, Miss Catherine. It would be wise not to stand in the way of progress." He turned his horse and rode away, leaving Eleanor fuming in the yard. She watched until he disappeared from sight, then turned to Xander. "Thank you for not saying anything more. I can fight my own battles." "I know you can, but sometimes it helps to show that you are not alone." Men like Morrison are bullies. They back down when they realize the odds are not as favorable as they thought. Eleanor wanted to argue, but she could not deny the truth of his words. "I hate this. I hate that I have to justify my right to keep what is mine." "I know. But you are stronger than he is, Eleanor. You will outlast him." The certainty in his voice surprised her. "You barely know me. How can you be so sure?" "Because I have seen you work. I have seen the way you care for this land. That kind of determination does not break easily." They stood looking at each other in the fading light, and Eleanor felt something shift between them, some subtle change in the air. Xander's pale eyes were intent on her face, and she found herself noticing details she had not paid attention to before. The way his jaw was set beneath his beard, the small scar through his left eyebrow, the way his gaze seemed to see past all her defenses to the uncertainty beneath. "I should start dinner," she said, breaking the moment. "We have another long day tomorrow." Over the next 2 weeks, they fell into a rhythm. Each morning they rose before dawn and worked until sunset, tackling the endless list of tasks that a ranch required. They repaired fences, doctored sick cattle, cleaned out the irrigation ditches, and began the arduous process of rebuilding the burned barn. Xander proved to be as good a worker as Eleanor had hoped, strong and tireless and clever with his hands. He could fix almost anything, and what he could not fix he could improvise. But more than that, Eleanor found herself enjoying his company. Xander was not much of a talker, but when he did speak, it was worth listening to. He told her stories about the mountains, about winters so harsh the snow piled 20 feet deep, about tracking elk through forests that had never seen an axe, about the terrible beauty of a land that cared nothing for human comfort or survival. And slowly, almost without Eleanor noticing, the walls she had built around herself began to crumble. She caught herself laughing at Xander's dry observations. She found excuses to work near him, to brush against his arm or hand him tools. She noticed the way his eyes followed her when he thought she was not looking, a hunger in them that had nothing to do with food. The tension between them built like a summer storm, electric and inevitable. Eleanor told herself it was foolish, that she barely knew this man, that he would be gone in another couple of weeks. But her heart did not listen to logic, and she found herself lying awake at night, thinking about Xander sleeping in his rough shelter, wondering what it would be like to have those powerful arms around her, 3 weeks after Xander's arrival, everything came to a head. They were working on the new barn, framing the walls with fresh-cut timber. It was hard, hot work, and both of them had stripped down to the minimum. Eleanor had removed her outer shirt, working in just her undershirt and vest. Xander had discarded his shirt entirely, and Eleanor found her eyes drawn again and again to the play of muscles across his broad back, the way his skin gleamed with sweat in the afternoon sun. She was so distracted that she did not notice when the beam she was positioning started to slip. It fell, catching her across the shoulders and knocking her to the ground. She landed hard, the breath driven from her lungs. Eleanor. Xander was beside her in an instant, lifting the beam off her with one hand and reaching for her with the other. "Are you hurt? Can you breathe?" Eleanor gasped, dragging air back into her lungs. "I am fine. Just knocked the wind out of me." But Xander was already running his hands over her shoulders and back, checking for broken bones with a gentleness that seemed impossible from someone so large. His touch sent shivers through her that had nothing to do with pain. "Nothing broken," he said, relief evident in his voice. "But you are going to have some bruises. What happened? You are always so careful." "I was not paying attention," Eleanor admitted then, because she could not seem to stop herself. "I was watching you." Xander's hand stilled on her shoulders. "Eleanor." She turned to face him, and the look in his pale eyes stole her breath more effectively than the falling beam. "I know this is foolish. I know you are only here temporarily. But I cannot stop thinking about you, Xander. I cannot stop wanting." She did not get to finish the sentence. Xander pulled her to him, his mouth finding hers with a hunger that made her knees weak. Eleanor kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands sliding up his bare chest to lock behind his neck. He was so warm, so solid, and when his arms closed around her it felt like coming home. They broke apart finally, both breathing hard. Xander rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. "I have wanted to do that since the first night I saw you," he confessed. "Standing in that barn door with your rifle, ready to take on the world, you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I had flour in my hair and mud on my skirt. I did not notice. I only saw your eyes and the strength in you, and I knew I was in trouble." Eleanor laughed shakily. "What kind of trouble?" "The kind where a man realizes he has found something worth staying for." Xander pulled back enough to look at her properly. "Your father was right, Eleanor. You are too stubborn for any man to handle, but that is exactly why you are perfect for me. I do not want someone I can handle. I want someone who challenges me, who makes me want to be better. I want you. I want you too. But Xander, I cannot give up this ranch. This is my home, my life. If you want someone who will follow you into the mountains, I am not that woman. I know, and I am not asking you to be. The truth is, Eleanor, I am tired of the mountains. I thought I could live that life forever, but lately I have been feeling like something was missing. Now I know what it was. It was you. It was this." He gestured at the ranch, the mountains, the valley spreading below them. "I want to build something that lasts. I want to wake up next to you every morning and work beside you every day. If you will have me, I want to stay, not for a month, forever." Eleanor's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "I am. I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a few weeks. But when something is right, you know it in your bones. And this is right, Eleanor. You and me. We fit." She wanted to say yes. Every fiber of her being was screaming at her to say yes. But the old fears, the old doubts, held her back. People will say you only want the ranch. They will say I married you because I could not handle things on my own. Let them say what they want. We will know the truth. And anyone who spends 5 minutes watching you work will know it too. You do not need me to run this ranch, Eleanor, but maybe, just maybe, you want me anyway. Eleanor looked up into Xander's face at the hope and uncertainty in his pale eyes and made her decision. Yes. Yes, I want you. Yes, I will marry you, but we do it as partners, Xander, equals. I will not be some meek little wife who defers to her husband. Xander grinned, that full transformative smile that she loved. I would not have you any other way, partners, equals, in all things. He kissed her again, and this time Eleanor let herself sink into it, let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have both the ranch and love. They were married a week later in Leadville, in a ceremony attended by the few friends Catherine had made over the years. It was a simple affair. Eleanor in a new dress of deep blue and Xander in clean clothes that still somehow made him look like a barely tamed wild creature. When the circuit preacher pronounced them man and wife, Eleanor looked up at her new husband and felt a fierce joy unlike anything she had ever known. The ride back to the ranch was full of laughter and plans. Xander had ideas for expanding the herd, for building up the breeding stock. Eleanor wanted to plant a larger garden, maybe even some apple trees. They talked over each other, excited and hopeful, and the future suddenly seemed bright with possibility. But when they arrived home, they found James Morrison waiting in the yard, and he was not alone. He had brought 6 men with him, all armed and all wearing the hard expressions of hired guns. Eleanor felt Xander tense beside her. His hand moved to the rifle in his saddle scabbard, but Morrison held up a hand. No need for violence, Mr. Pierce. I am simply here to deliver a message. The Consolidated Mining Company has filed a claim on this property. We believe there is silver on this land, and we have a legal right to extract it. That is ridiculous, Eleanor said. This is deeded property. You cannot just file a mining claim on someone's ranch. Actually, Miss Catherine, we can. Or should I say, Mrs. Pierce, congratulations on your marriage, by the way. Unfortunately, it does not change the situation. Mining claims supersede property rights in the territory of Colorado. It is the law. Show me this supposed claim, Eleanor demanded. Morrison handed her a sheaf of papers. Eleanor read through them quickly, her heart sinking. The claim appeared legal, filed with the territorial office in Denver. If it stood, it would give the mining company the right to dig on her property, effectively destroying the ranch. This is fraud, she said. There is no silver on this land. You are just trying to force me out. Prove it, Morrison said with a smile. Of course, proving it will require a legal challenge which could take months or even years. In the meantime, the company is within its rights to begin surveying the property. We will be back tomorrow with our equipment. I suggest you do not interfere, or you will find yourselves facing criminal charges. He rode away, his hired guns following, leaving Eleanor and Xander standing in the yard. Eleanor felt the weight of defeat settling over her. She had fought so hard, only to have it all ripped away by legal maneuvering. We will fight this, Xander said quietly. We will find a lawyer, challenge the claim. There has to be a way. With what money? We barely have enough to get through the season as it is, and even if we could afford a lawyer, Morrison is right. It could take years, and in the meantime they will destroy the ranch. Then we stop them from destroying it. Eleanor looked at her husband, saw the determination in his eyes. How? I do not know yet. But I am not going to let them take this place from you, Eleanor. I promise to be your partner, to stand with you. That means fighting when we have to fight. That night, they sat at the kitchen table and made plans. Xander suggested they ride to Denver, try to find allies in the territorial government. Eleanor proposed they rally the other ranchers in the area, create a coalition to fight the mining company's expansion. They talked late into the night, considering and discarding ideas. Finally, exhausted, they went to bed. It was their wedding night, but neither of them was in the mood for celebration. They lay in each other's arms, drawing comfort from closeness, and eventually slept. Eleanor woke before dawn to the sound of horses in the yard. She was out of bed in an instant, grabbing her rifle and moving to the window. In the gray pre-dawn light, she could see at least 20 men, some in the uniform of territorial marshals, others clearly miners or surveyors. "Xander, wake up, they are here." Xander was at her side instantly, peering out the window, his jaw tightened. "They said tomorrow. It has barely been 12 hours. Morrison does not play fair." They dressed quickly and went outside. Morrison was there, sitting astride his horse and looking insufferably smug. "Good morning, Mrs. Pierce. As you can see, we are ready to begin our survey. I trust you will not interfere." "Get off my land," Eleanor said, her voice deadly calm. "I am afraid I cannot do that. This is a legal operation, sanctioned by the territorial government. If you interfere, these marshals have orders to arrest you." One of the marshals, a grizzled man with tired eyes, rode forward. "Miss, I do not want trouble, but I have my orders. If this claim is legal, and it appears to be, then these men have a right to be here. Best thing you can do is step aside and watch them destroy my home, my father's life work. I am sorry, miss. Truly I am, but the law is the law." Eleanor looked at the assembled men, at their weapons and their cold faces, and knew she was beaten. She could not fight 20 armed men. Even Xander, for all his strength and skill, could not take on those odds. "Eleanor," Xander said quietly, "let me try something." He stepped forward, and several of the hired guns reached for their weapons. But Xander kept his hands carefully visible and his movements slow. "Mr. Morrison, you said you filed a claim for silver on this land, correct?" "That is correct." "And you are willing to stake the company's money on there being silver here? Enough to be worth the cost of extraction, of course. We have had the land surveyed. The geologists are quite confident. Then I propose a wager. Give us 1 month. If we can prove there is no silver on this land, you withdraw your claim and leave us alone. If you are right and there is silver, we will sell you the ranch for whatever you think it is worth." Morrison's eyes narrowed. "What makes you think you can prove something my geologists could not?" "Because I have spent 15 years in these mountains. I know rock and mineral formations like you know your account books. Give me a month, and I will give you proof one way or another." Eleanor wanted to protest, but something in Xander's eyes made her hold her tongue. He had a plan, she realized. She had to trust him. Morrison considered, stroking his chin. 1 month. But if you cannot prove your claim, you sell. And I want it in writing, notarized and legal." "Agreed," Xander said. They rode into Leadville that morning and drew up the agreement. Eleanor signed with a shaking hand, feeling like she was signing away everything she had fought for. But when she looked at Xander, he squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Trust me," he whispered. "I know what I am doing." Back at the ranch, Xander immediately began to work. He spent days walking every inch of the property, examining rock formations, digging test holes, taking samples. Eleanor helped where she could, but mostly she watched and tried to understand what he was looking for. "There is no silver here," Xander said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "I knew that from the beginning. The rock formations are all wrong, but Morrison's geologists would have known that too, which means they lied in their report. The question is, can I prove it in a way that will hold up legally? How do you prove the absence of something? You show that the conditions necessary for its formation do not exist. Silver deposits form in specific types of rock, under specific geological conditions. This area has none of those conditions. What I need is to find an independent expert who will back up my findings. Where are we going to find someone like that? And how will we pay them?" Xander was quiet for a moment. I have money. Not a lot, but enough. I have been trapping for 15 years, and I have very few expenses. I have been saving it, not sure what for. Now I know. I will ride to Denver, find a geologist at the School of Mines, and pay them to come out and do an independent survey. Xander, no. I cannot let you spend your savings on this. It is not just your fight anymore, Eleanor. This is our ranch now, our future. I am not going to sit back and watch someone steal it through fraud and legal tricks. He left the next morning, and Eleanor spent the following week in an agony of waiting. She continued the ranch work, feeding the stock and maintaining the property, but her heart was not in it. She kept imagining Xander's return, kept hoping he would come riding up the trail with good news. When he finally did return, 8 days later, he had a thin, scholarly-looking man with him. The man introduced himself as Dr. Harold Finch, a professor of geology at the Colorado School of Mines. "Mr. Pierce has told me about your situation," Dr. Finch said. "I must say, it sounds highly irregular. If the Consolidated Mining Company has indeed filed a fraudulent claim, it is a serious matter. Can you help us?" Eleanor asked. "I will need to examine the property, take samples, do a thorough survey. But if Mr. Pierce's preliminary findings are correct, and I suspect they are given his reputation, then yes, I believe I can provide a report that will invalidate the mining claim." Dr. Finch spent a week at the ranch, and Eleanor was impressed by how thorough he was. He examined every rock formation, took dozens of samples, and made extensive notes. At the end of the week, he sat down with Eleanor and Xander and delivered his verdict. "There is no silver on this property," he said flatly. "The geological conditions simply do not support it. What is more, any competent geologist would have known that immediately. The report that the Consolidated Mining Company submitted to the Territorial Office is either grossly incompetent or deliberately fraudulent. I suspect the latter." "Will you testify to that?" Xander asked. "I will do better than that. I will submit a formal report to the territorial government and recommend that they investigate the mining company's claims practices. This may not be the first time they have done this." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you, Dr. Finch. You have no idea what this means to us." "On the contrary, Mrs. Pierce, I believe I do. I have seen too many people driven off their land by unscrupulous corporations. It is time someone stood up to them." 2 weeks later, Eleanor and Xander rode back to Leadville to meet with James Morrison. Dr. Finch's report was in Eleanor's saddlebag, official and damning. When they arrived at Morrison's office, they found him waiting with his lawyer. "I assume you have come to finalize the sale of your property," Morrison said. "Actually, we have come to inform you that your mining claim is fraudulent," Eleanor said. She slapped Dr. Finch's report on the desk. "An independent geological survey has determined that there is no silver on our land. Your geologists lied in their report to the territorial government. We have filed a complaint, and there will be an investigation." Morrison's face went pale as he read through the report. His lawyer leaned over his shoulder, reading along, and Eleanor could see the exact moment they realized they were in trouble. "This is, well, there must be some mistake," Morrison blustered. "Our geologists are highly qualified. Then they should have no trouble explaining to the territorial authorities how they reached such different conclusions from Dr. Finch, who is one of the foremost geologists in the territory," Xander said. "Unless, of course, they were told what to find before they even set foot on the property." Morrison's lawyer put a hand on his client's arm. "Mr. Morrison, I think we should discuss this privately before we say anything further." "There is nothing to discuss," Eleanor said. "Your claim is withdrawn, effective immediately, or we take this report to every newspaper in Colorado. I am sure they would be very interested in a story about a mining company filing fraudulent claims to steal land from widows and honest ranchers." Morrison looked like he wanted to argue, but his lawyer shook his head firmly. "The claim will be withdrawn," the lawyer said, "and the company will compensate you for your trouble. Shall we say $5,000? $10,000, Xander said. "For the barn you had burned down, the stress you caused, and to make sure you think twice before you try this again with someone else." The lawyer grimaced but nodded. $10,000, but you sign an agreement not to pursue this matter further or speak to the press about it. Eleanor and Xander exchanged glances. $10,000 would make the ranch secure for years. They could rebuild, expand, maybe even hire some help. "Agreed," Eleanor said. They signed the papers that afternoon and walked out of Morrison's office with a bank draft for $10,000 and the knowledge that their ranch was safe. Eleanor felt like she could fly. On the ride back to the ranch, she kept looking at Xander, this man who had come into her life just a few months ago and changed everything. He had risked his savings to save her ranch. He had used his knowledge and his connections to fight a battle that should have been unwinnable. He had stood beside her as a true partner, never trying to take over or diminish her but supporting and strengthening her. "I love you," she said suddenly. "I have not said it yet, but I do. I love you, Xander Pierce, and I cannot imagine my life without you." Xander reined his horse to a stop and reached over to pull Eleanor close, kissing her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "I love you too, Eleanor. From the moment I saw you standing in that barn door. You are the strongest, most stubborn, most incredible woman I have ever known, and I thank God every day that your father thought to send me to you." They rode the rest of the way home in silence, hands clasped together, hearts full. The months that followed were the happiest of Eleanor's life. With the threat from the mining company gone and money in the bank, they could finally focus on building their life together. They finished the new barn, bigger and better than the old one. They expanded the herd, buying good breeding stock that would improve the quality of their cattle. They planted the apple trees Eleanor had dreamed of, setting them in neat rows near the house where they would be sheltered from the worst of the winter winds. And through it all, their love grew deeper. Eleanor had thought she knew what it meant to be partners with someone, but Xander showed her a kind of partnership she had never imagined. He asked her opinion on everything, from where to site the new barn to which bulls to buy for breeding. He never talked down to her or assumed he knew better simply because he was a man. And in return, Eleanor found herself opening up in ways she never had before, sharing her fears and doubts and dreams. Their physical relationship was a revelation as well. Xander was as gentle with her in bed as he was strong in the field, treating her like something precious and wonderful. He took his time learning what she liked, what made her gasp and arch and cry out his name. And Eleanor, who had never given much thought to physical pleasure, discovered that she had a passionate nature that matched her stubborn one. The first winter they spent together was hard, as all mountain winters were hard. Snow piled up to the eaves of the house, and the temperature dropped so low that water froze in the pipes. But Eleanor and Xander faced it together, working side by side to keep the stock fed and healthy, to keep the house warm and comfortable. At night, they huddled together in front of the fire, reading aloud or simply talking, and Eleanor thought she had never been so content. Spring brought new life to the ranch in more ways than one. As the snow melted and the first green shoots appeared in the meadows, Eleanor realized that she was pregnant. She told Xander one morning over breakfast, watching his face carefully for his reaction. He was silent for a long moment, his pale eyes searching her face. Then a slow smile spread across his features, joy lighting him from within. A baby. We are going to have a baby. Yes. Sometime in early fall, I think. Xander let out a whoop that probably scared the horses in the barn, then swept Eleanor up in his arms and spun her around. We are going to have a baby. Eleanor, I cannot even describe how happy this makes me. Eleanor laughed, holding onto his shoulders. I am glad you are happy. I was not sure how you would feel about it. How could I feel anything but joy? A child, our child. It is more than I ever dared hope for. He set her down gently, then immediately started fussing over her. Should she be doing heavy work? Should she be riding? Was she eating enough? Eleanor tolerated his concern for about a day before she put her foot down. Xander, I am pregnant, not fragile. Women have been having babies and working ranches since the beginning of time. I will be fine. But she could not help but be touched by his protectiveness. And as her pregnancy progressed and her belly swelled, she found herself grateful for his help with the heavier tasks. Xander took over the more strenuous work without making her feel useless, and Eleanor focused on the garden and the household tasks and preparing for the baby's arrival. Their son was born on a crisp October morning, just as the aspens turned gold on the mountainsides. The birth was long and hard, and there were moments when Eleanor thought she might not survive it. But Xander was beside her the whole time, holding her hand, wiping her brow, murmuring encouragement. And when their son finally came into the world, red-faced and squalling, Eleanor felt a love so fierce it took her breath away. He is perfect, Xander said, holding the tiny baby with infinite care. Look at him, Eleanor. He is perfect. They named him Thomas, after Eleanor's father, and the old ranch seemed to come alive with his presence. Eleanor discovered reserves of patience she had not known she possessed, and Xander proved to be a devoted father, doting on his son with the same intensity he brought to everything else. As Thomas grew from a baby to a toddler, Eleanor and Xander continued to build their life together. They added more cattle, started breeding horses, and became known throughout the territory for the quality of their stock. The ranch that Thomas Catherine had carved from wilderness flourished under their joint care, becoming more prosperous than it had ever been. But more than the prosperity, it was the love that filled the house that made Eleanor grateful every day. She would watch Xander teaching Thomas to ride, see the gentleness in his rough hands as he helped their son onto a pony, and marvel at how this fierce mountain man had become the center of her world. On a summer evening when Thomas was 3 years old, Eleanor stood on the porch watching the sunset. Xander came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her, resting his chin on top of her head. Happy? He asked. More than I ever thought possible, Eleanor said. Do you ever miss the mountains, the solitary life you had before? Not for a second. That was not living, Eleanor. That was just existing. What we have here, this is life. You, Thomas, the ranch. This is what I was searching for all those years, even though I did not know it. Eleanor turned in his arms to face him. They said I was too stubborn for any man, that no one could handle me. Xander smiled, that full, transformative smile she loved so much. They were right. You are too stubborn for any man, but I did not want to handle you. I wanted to love you. And that stubbornness, that fire, that is exactly what makes you perfect for me. He kissed her then, as the sun painted the sky in shades of crimson and gold, and Eleanor thought about how far they had come. From that first night when a mountain man had ridden up to her ranch with a letter from her dead father, to this moment of perfect peace and contentment. 2 years later, Eleanor gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Rose after Xander's mother. Thomas adored his little sister, following his mother around to help with the baby, and the house rang with laughter and life. The ranch continued to prosper. Word spread about the quality of the stock they raised, and buyers came from as far away as Denver and Santa Fe to purchase their cattle and horses. Xander proved to have a natural talent for breeding, selecting animals with an eye for traits that would produce strong, healthy offspring. Eleanor managed the business side, keeping meticulous records and driving hard bargains that earned the respect of even the most skeptical buyers. As the years passed, Eleanor would sometimes think back to those dark days after her father's death, when she had stood alone against the world, determined to hold onto her land no matter what it cost. She had thought then that accepting help made her weak, that relying on someone else meant giving up her independence. But Xander had taught her a different truth. Partnership, real partnership, did not diminish her strength. It multiplied it. Together they were more than the sum of their parts, each supporting and challenging and lifting up the other. On their 10th anniversary, Xander surprised Eleanor with a gift. He led her out to the hillside where her father was buried, and she saw that he had carved a beautiful headstone from local granite. It read, Thomas Catherine, 1823–1878. He carved a ranch from wilderness and raised a daughter who could stand against any storm. His legacy lives on. Eleanor wept, and Xander held her, understanding without words what it meant to her. Then he led her a little further up the hill, to a flat spot with a commanding view of the entire valley. I thought we might build a house here someday, he said. Something bigger for when Thomas and Rose have families of their own. This ranch should stay in the family, Eleanor. What your father started, what we have built together, it should go on. A dynasty, Eleanor said with a smile. Why not? The Pierce-Catherine dynasty has a nice ring to it. They built that house over the next 2 years, a large, sturdy structure that could house multiple generations. Thomas, now 15 and as tall as his father, helped with the construction. Rose, 13 and already showing signs of her mother's stubborn nature, insisted on helping too, despite everyone's protests that it was not proper work for a young lady. I am a Catherine Pierce, Rose said firmly. We do not concern ourselves with what is proper. Eleanor and Xander exchanged amused glances. Their daughter was definitely her mother's child. By the time Thomas turned 20, he was running most of the day-to-day operations of the ranch, showing the same dedication and skill that his parents had. But he also had a head for innovation, implementing new breeding techniques and herd management practices he had read about in agricultural journals. The ranch continued to grow and prosper under his care. Rose, meanwhile, had developed a passion for horses. She spent hours in the corrals, working with the most difficult animals, and she had a gift for it. Horses that other trainers had given up on gentled under her patient hands. By the time she was 18, she was training horses for wealthy buyers across the territory, earning a reputation as one of the finest horse trainers in Colorado. Eleanor watched her children with pride and wondered what her father would have thought. Thomas Catherine had wanted a son to carry on his legacy, but instead he had gotten a daughter who had built something even greater than he could have imagined. And that daughter had raised children who carried on the tradition of hard work, integrity, and fierce independence. On a spring morning in 1898, 20 years after she had first met Xander Pierce, Eleanor stood on the porch of the big house and looked out over the valley. The ranch sprawled below her, thousands of acres of productive land supporting hundreds of head of cattle and horses. The original ranch house was still there, now used as a bunkhouse for the hands they employed. The new barn was weathered but solid, and a third barn had been added to house the growing horse breeding operation. Xander came out to join her, moving a bit slower than he once had but still strong and vital at 52. His hair was more gray than dark now, and his beard was shot through with silver, but his eyes were the same pale blue, still capable of seeing straight through to her soul. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, slipping an arm around her waist. "I was just thinking about that first day you rode up to the ranch. I was so determined to send you away, so sure I did not need anyone's help. And I was so determined to honor my debt to your father that I would not have left even if you had shot me." Eleanor laughed. "It was a near thing, as I recall. It was. But look what came of it." He gestured at the valley, the ranch, the life they had built. "Your father knew what he was doing when he sent me to you. He did. He understood that I needed someone who would not try to control me or change me, someone who would love me exactly as I was. Stubborn and fierce and magnificent," Xander said, kissing her temple. "Yes, that is exactly who you are, and who you will always be." That summer, Thomas married a sweet-natured girl from Leadville, and Rose announced her engagement to a horse breeder from Wyoming. The ranch hosted a double wedding that fall, with half the territory in attendance. Eleanor stood with Xander and watched their children start their own lives, their own adventures, and she felt the satisfaction of a life well lived. More grandchildren came in the following years. Thomas and his wife had 3 boys who showed every sign of carrying on the ranching tradition. Rose and her husband split their time between Wyoming and Colorado, raising horses and 2 daughters who were as horse-crazy as their mother. Eleanor and Xander grew old together on the ranch they had built, watching seasons turn and generations grow. They worked side by side until their bodies would no longer allow it, and then they sat side by side on the porch of the big house, watching the world they had created continue without them. On a cold December morning in 1910, Xander Pierce died peacefully in his sleep, with Eleanor holding his hand. He was 64 years old, and he had lived every one of those years to the fullest. Eleanor mourned him deeply, but she did not regret a single moment of their life together. She lived another 5 years, staying active on the ranch until the very end. Thomas ran the operation by then, and he did it with the skill and dedication his parents had taught him. Eleanor spent her final years surrounded by children and grandchildren, telling stories about the old days, about the stubborn girl who had refused to give up her ranch, and the mountain man who had loved her for it. Eleanor Catherine Pierce died on a spring morning in 1915, sitting in her favorite chair on the porch, looking out over the valley she had fought so hard to keep. Her grandchildren found her there, peaceful and content, and they buried her next to Xander on the hillside overlooking the ranch. The Catherine Pierce Ranch continued for generations after that, growing and changing with the times but never losing the core values that Eleanor and Xander had instilled: hard work, integrity, partnership, and the understanding that sometimes the most stubborn, most difficult path is also the right one. The ranch still stands today, run by the descendants of Eleanor Catherine and Xander Pierce, a testament to what 2 people can build when they find the perfect partner. And on clear evenings, when the sun sets over the mountains and paints the valley in shades of gold, locals swear they can see 2 figures on the porch of the big house, sitting side by side, watching over the land they loved. The story of Eleanor and Xander became legend in Colorado, told and retold until it was hard to separate fact from fiction. But the essential truth remained: a stubborn woman who refused to be broken, and a mountain man who loved her not in spite of her strength, but because of it. Together they had built something that lasted, a legacy of love and determination that would endure for generations. Their great-great-grandchildren still work the ranch today, raising cattle and horses in the shadow of the same mountains that Eleanor and Xander knew. The original ranch house is a museum now, preserved as a piece of Colorado history. Visitors come from all over to see where the legendary Eleanor Catherine made her stand, where she and Xander Pierce built their life together. And if you ask the Pierce family members who still live on the ranch, they will tell you that the spirit of Eleanor and Xander lives on, in the stubborn determination to do what is right, even when it is hard. In the understanding that partnership means supporting each other's strengths rather than trying to diminish them. In the love of the land and the work and the life they chose. They will tell you that Eleanor Catherine was indeed too stubborn for any man to handle. And Xander Pierce, the mountain man who loved her, would not have wanted it any other way. Because that stubbornness, that fire, that refusal to bend or break was exactly what made her perfect for him. And together, they proved that the most powerful force in the world is not domination or control, but two strong people choosing to build a life side by side, as equals, as partners, as lovers. Their love story is a reminder that sometimes the best relationships are not the easy ones, but the ones that challenge us to be better, to be stronger, to be more fully ourselves. Eleanor and Xander found that in each other, and in doing so, they created something that lasted far beyond their own lives. A ranch, a family, a legacy of love that continues to this day, written in the very earth of the Colorado mountains they both loved so well.